you think about the greatest stock cars of all time, you might think of the Superbird or the Daytona. But what if I were to tell you that one of the best, most successful stock cars in history was from 1951? And all I gotta say is, what's up, Doc? We are, of course, talking about the legendary Hudson Hornet. Now, it was briefly built alongside its predecessor, the Commodore. So when the first generation launched in 1951, it shared quite a few similarities to its high-end luxury brother, primarily the styling and the chassis. Now, the styling is timeless and iconic on its own, but it's the chassis that's really interesting. It was comprised of a unibody with an encircled perimeter frame. Not only did this make it easy to get in and out of, because you stepped into it, it also lowered the center of gravity. That meant it was one of the lightest and best handling full-size cars in the world. And that, Hudson reckoned, would make it good at racing. You see, just 3 years before the launch of the Hudson Hornet, an underground racing series created by moonshine runners was organized under an official governing body, NASCAR. And in the first 3 years of certified stock car racing, it was nothing but privateers with their personal vehicles. But Hudson saw marketing opportunities and became the first manufacturer to form factory-backed racing teams. That meant the competitors who raced Hudson cars had full access to Hudson engineers and technicians, and whatever parts and money they needed, they could race with it. So, despite wielding an inline-six in a field of V8 competition, Hudson's notoriously overbuilt engines proved very successful and very powerful. NASCAR tuners were apparently able to reliably get over 200 horsepower and speeds in excess of 120 miles an hour. Marshall Teague and his engineer Smokey Yunick won on their debut at Daytona Beach in 1951, and from that point on, there was no stopping the fabulous Hudson Hornet. Hudson teams won 13 stock car races in 1951, with Herb Thomas taking the crown. The Hornet followed that up by winning 27 out of 34 Grand National races in 1952, then 22 out of 37 in 1953, and then his worst ever NASCAR season in 1954, winning just 17 out of 37 races. And in AAA circuit racing, the Hornet was another unstoppable juggernaut. In 1952, it won 40 out of 48 races that season, 14 of them by Marshall Teague, who took the crown with a 1,000-point lead over second place. All of this made the Hudson Hornet an icon that now resides in the National Historic Vehicle Registry. And the stock car wasn't bad either. It came as 4 different versions, with a max price of $34,000 today. It came as a 2-door convertible, a 4-door sedan, a pillarless coupe, or the iconic 2-door coupe. And since it was the highest trim Hudson you could buy, it got incredible things, such as seating for 6, an electric clock from the factory, and an optional radio. Then there was those notoriously overbuilt Hudson engines. The 5-liter straight 6 was the largest mass production engine anywhere in the world at the time. And with its optional twin-barrel carburetors, it made 145 horsepower and 275 foot-pounds of torque. And if you wanted more, you could get the 7X NASCAR homologation modifications launched in 1954, and it had several parts developed by their NASCAR teams, such as a functional hood scoop, high-compression piston heads, and a new camshaft. That made 210 horsepower to the wheels, with some claiming as high as 240. and it made a nice and consistent 300 plus foot-pounds of torque across the whole RPM range. Sure, by today's standards these are relatively puny numbers, but this is 1954. That same year, the brand new Corvette made just 150 horsepower. This was an incredibly fast car for the era, and in order to handle that much speed, owners could option other severe usage parts, such as tougher shocks, split exhaust, spindles with larger bearings, and improved drum brakes. It was an icon that sadly still couldn't save Hudson. The Hornet's success simply wasn't enough for the Bills, and Hudson merged with Nash in 1955 to form the American Motor Corporation, AMC. So when the second-gen Hornet came along, well, it was a bit worse, quite a bit worse. Critically, it did not have its incredible step-down frame, which AMC criticized for being too difficult to update as the years went on. In fact, the entire Hudson DNA was gone, replaced with Nash underpinnings with Hudson styling draped above it. The 7X straight 6 was dropped for the base 160 horsepower 5-liter straight 6. In fact, the only thing AMC actually did right was install a 5.4-liter V8 under the hood, which made 255 horsepower by 1957, which is an incredible amount, by the way. But it was too late. After the law disaster in 1955, American automakers voluntarily stopped all factory racing in 1957, and with its big selling point finished, the Hudson Hornet was killed off that same year, having sold just under 154,000 cars over its entire lifespan. The Hornet was, quite simply, too little, too expensive, and too late to save the Hudson Motor Company. But for those who did buy it, it did its job in spades. It was one of the fastest, most comfortable cars on the road, serving citizens and law enforcement alike. And on the track, it was unbeatable. The Hornet was NASCAR's first back-to-back champion, and it still has one of the highest career win rates in NASCAR history, at 21%. The sole surviving fabulous Hudson Hornet is still fully functional. It's here in Ypsilanti, Michigan. And it still makes appearances at historic racing events. Hell, I saw it just last October at the American Festival of Speed. And for everybody else, on the big screen anyway, the Hudson Hornet was immortalized in Pixar's 2006 film Cars as Doc Hudson, voiced by Academy Award winner and 24 Hours of Le Mans driver Paul Newman. And I don't think there's a better person to voice such a legendary vehicle.